Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who long to end the cycle of life and death and escape into the magnetic cloud. Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we're reading fantasy books. This time, Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in actually genre classifications. I feel like this comes up every time we read fantasy books or, books that we start under the rubric of fantasy, but something always makes it a little bit more complicated than that.
My other favorite booktube show, Liminal Spaces, Chris, I think he calls it a sci-fantasy, which I guess is a genre. Very cool. I'm Bob. I'm interested in, so I've read this 1.5 times now. And the first time I didn't like it very much. I was reading it and listening to it. Second time, just listened to it, enjoyed it a lot more. But my notes still say, why we need more dick. We were really interested in Deus Irae when we had Roger Zelazny and Philip K. Dick. And I know I've been accused of being a dick hater, but I never said that. I said, I thought Dick, I always think he's overrated. And then I read it and I think, my God, that's a masterpiece. But my contention with this book, I did end up liking a lot, but I felt Deus Irae has something human, extra human, and weird that's missing from this book. But let's talk about what is going on in this book. It is a roller coaster.
It is, yeah. So, the fundamental premise is a far future society where people who have certain technology have established themselves as the pantheon of Hindu gods. And then there's one man who dare oppose him, the Buddha. So chapter 1 is basically like the Buddha, or Sam, as we're calling him, becoming resurrected. His consciousness is pulled back from the magnetic cloud surrounding the planet back into a human body. From there, from chapters 2 through 6, I believe, we then go into a kind of reminiscences. Like you might be wondering how I got here. Which is taking us back to a far-flung, a distant past time where Sam basically led a revolt in a final battle against those Hindu gods. They ended up defeating him and casting his consciousness into the sky. But then chapter 7 brings us back to, I guess we would say, the present tense. And what they're doing is doing a final push against the Hindu gods, and they've allied themselves with a new power in the land, a Christian power in the land, and, they're going to try to break the pantheon. Anything I missed there, Bob? Anything that feels like it got left out?
I think you did a great job there, Zach. I think you did a great job. It's a very complicated book, and I think you've summed it up really well. There is just a lot. There is so much in this book, and that was some of my problems with it, is you have to invest a lot. It was kind of like when we read the Silmarillion, and the first time neither of us really liked it. Then we read it again, liked it a lot more. Lord of Light, not Lord of the Lights. Lord of Light is hard. It's a hard book. It starts off, I think, quite simple, and when it goes back in time, we get invested in so many relationships between characters. I don't know why I'm bobbing my hand like little bunny frou-frou, but those are the difficult parts. When Shiva gets involved, when Kali gets involved, and when names start changing. But I think if we frame it almost as a Next Generation episode gone wrong, that's kind of the start of this, because we're on a ship. They're maybe from Earth, I think. They're sending out lots of ships potentially to colonize different places, and this is one place that they end up. And this, we don't know how many people are on it. Their ship is called the Jewel of India, and maybe there's 100, 200, maybe 1,000 people on this, but there's probably 12 main crew members who are kind of like the crew members on the bridge of the Enterprise. And we have a Ensign Wesley Crusher character who becomes the god of death. Yama, who is this kid on the ship and experimenting, doing all sorts of chemistry experiments. When they get to the planet, he's dissecting every animal that he can find, and they start calling him, to joke around, the Lord of Death, because he just keeps... death follows him. He kills things to test them, and he makes weapons and tests chemicals. He becomes the literal Lord of Death through the technology you already mentioned, where those original dozen, I guess, however many there are, those original people who are the like highest in charge have reproduced an Hindu caste system. So all of the people they brought with them are at the bottom or somewhere in between. They are at the top, and they live in this weird frozen heaven where they just do lots of nutso stuff. And then everyone else is, like you said, life and death are wearing them out. They're going in and out of different bodies because of this new technology that this crew developed, especially Wesley Crusher, Yama. He's developed this technology that is Hinduism, basically. It's reincarnation, but it's now controlled by these dirty bastards. These guys at the top. I shouldn't say that because they're, I guess they're gods, but they aren't really. They're people who have taken on the aspects of gods, and I think they're really abusing their power.
I thought I had read this book, but I realize now that I had not fully read this book until you explained it in terms of Star Trek Next Generation characters. We should really get in the habit of this in the future. Maybe we could read some Dostoevsky together, or when we read Shakespeare next. Map it out in terms of the Star Trek characters.
Star Trek is all over that. I'll tell you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, okay. So one thing I'll say that I loved about this book is it really highlighted for me the strength of a good premise when we're talking about science fiction or even fantasy. Like, the thing about this book is that I've wanted to read it for so many years, ever since someone gave me the elevator pitch of, distant future where people have set themselves up as the Hindu pantheon and a man who's Buddha is going against them. And I said, wow, what a concept.
Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. Sign me up. And I like the problem. So, okay. What it makes me realize is that the pitch is everything. Like if does that make sense? Like the problem is that
the high concept, right?
Yeah, in a large sense, he failed to truly deliver on that pitch. Like if this was a better written book, I feel like this could have been bigger than Star Wars. You know what I mean? But the pitch is incredible. It's the execution which lags, but that's fine because it makes me wonder, like, into the future. I'm gonna write a novel. I'm gonna write a short story. Huh. Like it makes me be like, what I have learned from Zelazny is you gotta have the pitch ready to go, and then everything follows from there.
I think that guy had tons and tons of pitches. I guess his books are all different. Every book that he does is like a totally different experiment, which is super cool. I have an idea of why it doesn't necessarily work for us. Again, the second time I was just listening to it, taking it in, I enjoyed it a lot more, but there are still parts that I hated just as much, and I'll talk about those. I think some of it is great. I really loved it. But some of it just really drags, and I want to talk about that. But this is just an aside because I've been hearing other booktubers, and then I went and looked. There is a crazy film history, since you mentioned Star Wars. Do you know the film history of this book?
Lay it on me, Bob. Lay it on me.
This is nuts. So I guess it was going to be contracted to. Someone was going to make a Hollywood movie of Lord of Light, and the script was ready, but kind of like Jodorowsky's Dune, it never really got made. But they started making all these ideas. I don't think they ever actually built the set. They were going to build a set that would be a permanent set and turned into like a Disneyland, but a Lord of Light land. However, it was not made. And then I guess I've never seen Argo, but that movie is based on the movie that was going to be made for Lord of Light. So the CIA took the script and then used it as a pretense for going and doing an operation that is then taken up in Argo. So they pretend to be shooting a movie, but they're actually CIA agents. Yeah. Anyway,
I believe it's the Iranian hostage crisis.
Is it the Contra? That's right.
Yeah, they're trying to get the hostages out, and they say they're basically shooting a Lord of Light adaptation. I feel like there's a really good book out there, like a really good history book that really dramatizes all this.
What I think doesn't work in this book, but I get why it's cool. I get why it's cool. What doesn't work, I think, is just the action. And the reason I'm saying the action, yes, there's a great high concept. There's a great premise. Like you said, that's kind of what sells you on this book. But I felt maybe sometimes Zelazny trapped himself a little bit into this because it's all coming to a war. You know, it has to come to a war. Yes, Buddhism is supposed to be a passive religion. However, the idea of this Buddha is going to bring everyone to then release all of this. Everyone's been trapped, and now they're trying to revolutionize it, I guess. So release people, release the culture. So it's going to be a violent war. But everything is kind of now, you have to detail that action. So I feel like Zelazny is trapped into detailing that action. And there are a lot of character standoffs, which can be interesting, especially in Westerns. However, when they are members of a pantheon and they're just gods, it feels like what I didn't like about Endymion, where we have these extremely powerful characters just melting each other into the ground and then they stand up again. It becomes a Dragon Ball Z episode. And that, I feel like, even he wasn't into it when he's writing it, but he feels like he had to.
Yeah.
Felt like he had to.
I like the comparison to Dragon Ball Z. Actually, because as I was reading it, I was thinking this is a samurai story in the sense of like, so this is like, yes, and because Dragon Ball also does this. I say as someone who's seen maybe one episode of Dragon Ball, but
hey, Trunks has a sword. So I don't know.
Yeah. But like, so
Thanks.
You have two super powered people and they meet up and you know they're going to fight. They know they're going to fight. Everyone knows they're going to fight. But they stop to have like a kind of philosophical, political debate, conversation. They lay out their positions and talk things over leading up to the fight. And like what in one of the situations, like they're talking and one of the guy pulls out a pipe and starts smoking it, and you know they're talking about the rightness and wrongness of the caste system that they've set up, and it's like so. It's like I don't know how to describe it other than just I've only seen this kind of thing happen in like samurai stuff. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's this one guy who has this long history of kicking ass behind him. And our hero, who we know can't lose, but he's dangerously underpowered. And then they're going to beat the hell out of each other and you know, impact a crater into the earth, you know, or you know, slice things in the air that are so fast the human eye can't see. You know, just we just abandon realism for the sake of this kind of high climactic battle. Yeah. So to me, that was what I felt like this was drawing from quite a bit.
I just heard the beginning of Enter the Wu-Tang there. While you were talking about the samurai facing each other. My father was a brave samurai warrior. Yes, I think that gets a little bit tedious. But if you haven't read this and you're planning on reading it, you might bump up against that and put the book down. And I would not recommend putting the book down because it does get back to really interesting stuff. Right after the pipe scene, he goes down into the, what is it called? The Hell Well. That's the main name for it, but he also, I think, compares it to Hades or Tartarus. I can't remember. But that is such an interesting part. We haven't really mentioned them that much because there's so much going on in this book. But the original inhabitants of this world, there's a in their histories, in the inhabitants' histories, they used to be bodied people. They used to be somewhat like humans, although they're not from Earth as far as we know, but they are similar to a humanoid creature. Then they, kind of similar to, I mean, what these gods are talking about, reached some kind of new existence, almost like a nirvana or something, where they just turn into magnetic fields, they turn into energy. And so now, the only real history of them is that they've always been energy. They just have this old legend about themselves. They can possess bodies. They can get into bodies. They're called demons by, I guess, the newcomers who've been there now for a long time. But they're called demons, and they're also called the Rakashas, I think. And they are called fire elementals. They're compared to lightning. But then when Siddhartha, or Sam, the main character, who is the Buddha, goes down into the hell wheel. Hell, no, what is it called?
It's called the
Hellwell.
Hell
Sorry,
Wheel.
the Hellwell.
Hellwell, yeah.
Hellwell. It I don't know much about Hinduism, but it does remind me, and this is my only analog into what's going on here. It reminds me a lot of the shades of going down to Hades because they're all trapped behind. Sam had a big part of this too, trapping them so they could not kill the colonists because they were so powerful. These lightning-like people who can't be controlled until Sam has this really special power where he can control electromagnetic fields. So they trap them in different objects, and they put most of them in this hell well. It just reminded me a lot of like Disney's Hercules when people are going down into Hades and trying to pull up these weird ghost-like creatures, and they're begging for Sam to release them. But I thought that scene is so cool, where we go from a hokey scene into that really interesting, almost hokey scene, really towing the line. But I think they're a really interesting necessity for this book because they are so chaotic, these lightning people, and they don't have any morality, I guess. Their only morality, I like this, and this reminded me of Philip K. Dick, their only morality is settling gambling debts. I thought that was great. Like that's all they believe in is gambling debts.
They love gambling. They love vices. So actually, this is a great example for me of allowing the concept to really dictate not just where the story goes, but like the world building in general. Because like if you're going to have the Hindu pantheon, it makes sense to have kind of like the negative deities, like the negative mid-tier, mid-card deities, which would be like the demons and things like that. I think that having them in there fleshes out this world, and it fleshes out the concept in a really interesting and fun way. And I love there's a scene of possession in here. They take over his body. You know, it harkens to, I guess you would say, like would you say real world possession? Would you say, can we call possessions real world? A non-textual possession. It harkens to a non-textual possession of religious yore. And the demon entity takes him to a harem. He does a bunch of gambling. But what I thought was so like psychologically relevant and interesting and cool was that after a certain point, he realizes that some of this like gambling he does, some of these lusts that he feels, it's not all the demon like making those choices. Like for example, he'll say, "Ooh, not that girl," and he'll be like, "Wait a minute, I made that selection, not the demon." And what it makes him realize is that there's a kind of like inner demon within himself, and a kind of like by extension inner demon within us all. So like what that's doing to me is creating a kind of like religious conversation within the text. It's creating a kind of like religious viewpoint, an ethical viewpoint, a kind of, you know, the kind of good or evil, how to live statements that you would expect from a text that deals with gods and religions and things like that. But since we're reading a book that is working within the concept of these kind of like religious entities, I think it makes so much sense for Zelazny to actually engage with this kind of religious thinking, this kind of how to live, how to think about the good and evil of our choices. That worked for me.
Feels like such a torrent of inspiration, that scene too. I don't even know if it was really planned. At least it didn't feel like it. It feels like he just suddenly saw gold and went after it. Sam, the Buddha, is possessed. Like you said, he's possessed by Taraka, I think is the name. He's the leader of these electromagnetic field spirit people. And like you said, he's almost passed out. So Siddhartha is not really experiencing anything. He just kind of blacks in, blacks out, where he's at the gambling den. He's doing lewd, lustful things. And then eventually he does overpower him. And I love when Taraka says, "What have you done to me? Now I'm starting to feel guilt. I'm starting to feel bad about these things. I'm not feeling fulfilled anymore by all of this gambling." And you're right. It is an idea of how one spends their time, about what one thinks is a meaningful life. But then he says, "Yes, I've given you the curse of the Buddha." I thought that was so cool. The curse of the Buddha is now guilt. So having to reflect on your actions and see that there is meaning to them.
It also kind of brings us back to that kind of like Dragon Ball fight, that kind of samurai fight thing, where it's like, oh, you have the Lord of the Demons and he's taken over your body. How to beat him? Well, he's so good. What did he do? He introduced guilt into the psyche of the demon and it broke him. Is great.
To extend the Dragon Ball Z metaphor, it's like when Goku makes Majin Buu turn into a good person. Anyway, I won't dig myself too deep into this hole. I wanted to, this is more nerdy actually, but let's go for it. Did they remind you at all when we first meet them, we're going into a flashback, a flash forward to the guy who's been turned into a monkey, who is Siddhartha's son from many generations ago.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Anyway, he goes and he sees these lightning people in a field, and they're having like a meeting. And I thought, oh my God, I've seen this before. Where have I seen this? And they're all speaking in this slow, drawn out language, and they start singing together, and they're all in a circle. And I thought, okay, really, really old beings who live in a forest, who have long meetings that take days at a time, and no one understands what they're saying. You know where I'm going.
I know exactly where you're going with this. Say it.
Ants.
Say it, Bob.
They're ants. I was thinking they're such like ants, and because also the only people that can work with them, Siddhartha, who has this really special power that the other Hindu deities don't. This is a special aspect that is being able to control these fields. It's like Gandalf or Saruman being the only ones who trust them and are willing to go contact them. Of course, Saruman just tricks them, but Gandalf actually has a relationship with all of these Ents, and he has a special trust, whereas everyone else says, don't go into Fangorn Forest. It's dark, it's spooky, it's mysterious. The only people that go in there never come out again. It's like everyone's doubt in working with the Rakshas, and only Siddhartha, who actually trapped them in the first place, decides, no, we need to unify with them because they're so powerful. They're the only way to overthrow the gods who've been in power too long and have, I guess, just stuck everyone in a mire, and also stuck everyone who they don't agree with into terrible bodies. Actually, I wanted to ask you about these terrible bodies. I thought this was such a cool idea. I don't know why I should say terrible bodies are a cool idea. What I mean is this reincarnation that has been co-opted here by these colonists. They use almost like slot machines. It's kind of like where you had to pay and it would
indulgences.
Kind of, and thank you, indulgences. You could kind of polish out some of the tarnishing in your soul. So you could pay for these indulgences. So similarly, now they can put in coins, or they can put in they can invest themselves into these almost slot machines. And then these gods use brain probes to see what this individual has been thinking. If they want to change their body, they're kind of applying to do that. However, if they don't agree with you politically, they're going to put you into the body of a dog, or the body of an ape, or the body of a corpse. They're going to make you into a zombie because they don't agree with you politically. And they say it's fair, but it's only if you are not going to, I guess if you don't follow their ideologies, and then also if you don't further their cause to stay in power, you're going to end up a zombie. I thought that was horrifying. What do you think of this? They've stolen reincarnation to make it to perpetuate a caste system and to, I don't know, just control, I guess, all of society. What did you think of this?
I love it. I love it, Bob, but I'll tell you why. Because the book sets them up as bad guys, for sure. No question about that. But let's think about the situation we have here. It's a world with no printing press. Someone invents the toilet at one point. Good for them, But it's
They've invented the printing press 3 times, but they destroy it like Sir Thomas More.
Yeah. It's a super low tech, low education world. Um, and but there also exists this kind of high technology that's so intense that it just looks like it's godlike. And you'll see it's been the comparison has been made numerous times before to Clarke's third law, Arthur C. Clarke, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So the group, the ideology, the mindset that wants to break the pantheon, the accelerationists, are basically saying that the pantheon's technology should be available to everyone. And I think that, you know, I think that makes sense. That sounds really good. That sounds like such a good idea. Oh my gosh. Yeah, everyone should have this technology. But then it's like, well, wait a minute. Can anyone right now, today in real life, uh, build an atom bomb? Can everyone have a Gatling gun?
Mhm.
Like like if you just like think about it for a second, it's like, oh yeah, maybe not everyone should have the ability to cause a firestorm that like wipes out an entire forest in a big flash of light, like the fire guy has. Uh, Now, does that justify what the extent in which they've just totally pulverized this civilization of people on this far-flung planet? Maybe not, but I do think that the system that they have has a kind of like it has a kind of like poetic fittingness with what they're trying to do, because it sounds like they are letting people into their kind of exclusive club, their pantheon. But what you have to do first is go through the cycles of birth and death and go higher and higher, kind of like a promotion in like a corporation until you get to the top.
It's a pyramid scheme.
It's a
Yeah.
pyramid scheme for sure, for sure. Um, but what they're doing is they're like literally mind reading people. And if you have like negative thoughts, violent thoughts, impure thoughts, wicked thoughts, they send you into the body of a dog. They don't want you near these weapons, this high technology. You know what I mean? I I'm I I'm not 100% against them. I might be an anti-accelerationist. We have to
Ooh.
kill the Buddha. Or at least send him up to the magnetic cloud again.
He loved it up in the magnetic cloud, the singing
Oh
of the
God.
stars. So,
God bless him, he did.
yeah. I remembered his son's name. I think it's Tanakh. Unless I'm thinking of Tanakh, EOSD. I might be thinking, I might be thinking of that. Um, but yes, I was thinking when we read. I always remember the old name, Tiger Tiger. The Stars My
Stars My Destination
Destination.
by Alfred
Stars by
Bester.
Alfred Bester. That really shocked me, the end of that book, because the conclusion is, yes, they have atom bombs, but what they do now, people have been able to now control. They've released this certain thing that's like an atom bomb. It's really small, and you can put it anywhere, and then using mind control, you can blow it up, and it can destroy huge parts of a city. And then they decide that okay, they're going to give that mind control to everyone all at once, and that and that will keep everyone safe. That's going to be their new diplomacy. I thought that was just insane. So I guess, yes, we can see their motivations here. If you give, if Ensign Wesley Crusher gives the rest of those kids studying to be in Starfleet the power to have an atom bomb, a lot of those kids are pretty, they don't think before they leap. So it could be dangerous. But yes, they have gone too far where maybe they haven't, because at the end of the book, we don't really know what's going to happen after the success of the Buddha. Yes, they've thrown down heaven. Yes, they've destroyed heaven. They've destroyed the gods and their pantheon, but it could just go into chaos, and that's what the gods have been saying. If we let them, if we let them have the printing press, they try it the fourth time and it sticks, they're going to create weapons and make more wars, perpetual wars, and probably destroy everything. So it's really easy to side with the accelerationists, but now I understand, and we are left with a huge ambiguity there. It's a success for our main character, for Sam, but he just leaves and he's not going to see that success through or give it any guidance. It could be a very dark, chaotic success.
Let's do this genre talk real quick, because this is
Oh,
the
yeah,
first of
sorry.
a series of fantasy novels that we're kicking off. And I think we coincided our picks to be kind of in alignment with the authors who are publishing in the Dangerous Visions anthology, which we're currently in the middle of reading and publishing on YouTube. Sorry, Spotify. Uh, but Zelazny is one of those names, and this book is commonly shelved or at least associated with the fantasy genre. But it becomes very clear that what this book is doing is not, it's a very impure, either a very impure science fiction or a very impure fantasy. And I guess right off the bat, I want to ask you if you feel like we have shelved this one correctly. Does it belong in the as the first in the fantasy sequence?
We failed again. First we tried Song of Kali, found out it was horror. Now we've tried this, found out it's sci-fi. I think that Zelazny wanted this to be, I think it was what he says, equally sci-fi as it is equally science fiction. Now, it's been a long time since I've read her, and I'm probably getting her name wrong because I didn't look at this before, but I think it's Anne McCaffrey who wrote Dragon's Milk? I'm probably very wrong. There's a science fiction author who wrote about dragons, and I loved them when I was younger, and of course have forgotten them now. But her idea was dragons that are science fiction. So the idea of where the dragons come from all comes from genetics. So they're science fiction dragons, but then the whole series is a high fantasy series where dragons are just doing dragon things and the sci-fi is left behind. I wonder if that's kind of what's going on here, where we have everything is totally, this is a classic sci-fi tale of colonists going to another planet, colonizing the planet. But now they've evolved kind of through their technology to become myths. So it also actually feels a little bit more like science fiction mythology than it does fantasy. But did you feel fantasy? Did this remind you of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, any of the fantasy we've read?
I feel like this is so like what you said, but flipped a little bit. I feel like this is a classic sci-fi premise that plays out as a classic kind of pulpy fantasy tale, because there's no, like, it's set in the far future. That sounds SF. It's set on a distant planet. That sounds SF. It involves, magic and miracles from gods, but it's all technologically grounded. That's SF. But beyond that, there's like no connection to the real world or actual science. Like a lot of times when we're dealing with SF, we're kind of guessing on, we're taking current technology and extending it out 20 years and seeing what could happen. Or we have this exact world, but we're switching one element of it. And then, we're seeing what that alternate reality is going to be like. With this, we've just invented a world. Everyone has these crazy powers, and no one seems to be able to die. And how does it all work? Well, just wave it away. It's space magic.
Space magic.
I really think that this is, like, to its very bones, a quintessential fantasy novel whose language that it uses as is SF. So, like, think of it. So what you have is a cake that is baked out of pure fantasy, but then someone put a couple sprinkles on top, put a little frosting of SF.
I think it's an upside down cake where the sci-fi is at the bottom. That's the foundation. The pineapples. I like the cake analogy. I made a boo boo. It's Anne McCaffrey, Dragon Riders of Pern. I have no idea what Dragon's Milk is. So I set you up.
I don't know, but it's high in calcium.
Yes. Will sprout wings. Wow. Better than Red Bull.
Yep.
Got Dragon's Milk. I'm taking myself in a deep hole. Too much Dragon Ball Z.
We're going to get some weird comments on this one.
Yep. More hate. More. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, I'm down to read more Zelazny. I feel like, oh, at the back of my copy of this one had an advertisement for like the book that came up before it that was like the forces of life and death are battling each other for their final confrontation, and it's in a place that neither of them are used to, the plane of mortality. And I was like, yeah, this guy's got ideas. I'm willing to follow him wherever he wants to go. Uh, I yeah, I because I loved Deus Irae with Philip K. Dick. So
Yeah, that was great.
he's got a free ticket to ride anytime he wants to show up on the show. All right, talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.